Hello everyone. Thank you for your patience and welcome to the webinar titled How to Make Wise Production Changes to Oracle Clinical and RDC Studies, presented by Perficient's Tammy Dutkin, who is our Director of Clinical Data Management and EDC. My name is Eugene Safanov. I'm the Marketing Manager for our Life Sciences practice. Before I turn it over to Tammy, I'd like to cover a couple of housekeeping items and then provide a brief overview of our company. So a couple of things to keep in mind throughout the webinar. One is everyone on this call will be on mute. You are welcome and encouraged to submit questions throughout the presentation. Just type them in the chat feature, which is located on the left side of your screen. Keep in mind that it's important to state your questions as clear as possible, since we'll be answering questions at the very end, and we may not exactly know what your question is in reference to. So keep that in mind, please. You should also know that other webinar participants cannot see who's asking the questions, so feel free to ask away. And lastly, we'll be sending you a link to the recording and the slide deck in the next few days. So now that I've covered the logistics, let's just move on to a quick overview of Perficient. There we go. Perficient is an IT consulting company that offers a host of IT solutions for a variety of industries, including, of course, life sciences, as well as healthcare, financial services, consumer products, and a couple of others as well. We have employees and offices all over the world, including the locations you see on this slide. And as you may expect, most of our clients are based in North America and Europe. This slide here contains a bunch of facts. I'll just point out a few of them. We were founded in 1997. We were publicly traded on the NASDAQ. And at the moment, we have a little over 2,500 employees. This slide right here that talks about what we offer. We offer our clients many different types of business and technology solutions, from business process management and information management to content management systems and all the way to portals. We have a broad portfolio of solutions and partners we work with. The services we provide are what you would typically expect from an IT services company. So that's consulting, implementations, upgrades, cloud hosting, application support, project management, and so on and so on. But when it comes to the life sciences space and the specific IT applications, we cover and specialize in data management and EDC, safety and pharmacovigilance, precision medicine, trial management, operations, data warehousing, analytics, and a couple of others. That said, we really provide a lot of services that relate to many other areas within a life sciences company, so it's not just the clinical and safety space. All right, now that I've covered the housekeeping items, I'd like to pass it over to Tammy. But actually, before I do that, I noticed that I have one more slide to cover. So because this is a data management webinar, I'll just quickly cover what Tammy's team does. Tammy's team specializes in the implementation of data management and EDC systems, such as OC, RDC, TMS, and so forth. We also do process reengineering. We deal with SOPs, CDISC, CDASH. But we can help with training, whether it's for sponsors, for site users, etc. And lastly, we can assist with rescue studies and project management, as well as study build services. So now I can turn it over to Tammy. Take it away, please.
Hi everybody, this is Tammy Dutkin. I am the Director of Clinical Data Management and EDC here at Perficient. I have been in the clinical research space for over 20 years. I previously worked at some boutique small data management and full service CROs. And I've been with Perficient / BioPharm now for about 4 years. I've been working with Oracle Clinical and all of the tools surrounding Oracle Clinical really since the late 1990s. So I've been using it for a number of years. But as with anything, every time I go in, I swear I learn something new about it. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to go through some discussions on how to make post-production changes. Some warnings surrounding when you're going to make changes, kind of some cautions as to what you should do when you're making that decision. We'll talk a little bit about the process, and then we'll go through some things to consider as well as how to draft an impact analysis to make sure that you're aware of what's going to be changing when you do make your post-production changes. And then we'll go into some specific changes on DCMs as well as how to go about making those. We'll talk a little bit about migrating form versions. We'll talk about visit changes and DCI book changes, and then we'll wrap it all up with a chance for everybody to do a Q&A. So what exactly are post-production changes? They're not uncommon to have to make, and they're usually after your CRFs or your eCRFs have been finalized, your study is live and in production, and patients have been enrolled and data has been collected, and data has already been entered into your OC or RDC system. There are many reasons why you may need to make post-production changes. So you may have a protocol amendment. You may have CRF modifications that are needed. Maybe you have a change to your work processes or requirements. And God forbid it could be because you've all of a sudden discovered that you had an error that you moved into production and that you need to make some corrections. So there's lots of reasons, and you just need to make sure that those reasons are justifiable and that they make sense to go ahead and make any change. So a few warnings about doing post-production changes. You want to make sure that you're fully documenting what you intend to do and that you're fully documenting and thinking about what the impact of those changes are going to be. You also need to make sure that everybody is on board with these changes being made, because any error that you make here, because your study is already live, can have some huge impacts. So you need to make sure that everybody's on the same page and aware of what their role is going to be and what impact it's going to have on their workload when you're going to go make a change. It's really important too, as with any kind of database rollouts that you're going to do, is that if possible you need to create things provisionally and then make sure you test them before you go ahead and activate. Now in many cases for post-production changes you can't necessarily test them in production. So if you're creating a new form version, you can't test that in RDC before that new form version goes live. If that's the case, then you really need to make sure that someone else double checks your work, because it's really easy to make some of these changes, and sometimes it's really easy to make a mistake as well. If you can't test some things, but you're making a lot of changes, or you're making changes that you're not exactly sure what the impact is going to be, a good way to test it is to maybe clone your production data into your test database and then make the changes there, fully documenting what it is that you are doing, and do your testing on your test database instead of doing it on your production database. And then once you have those steps down and you know exactly what the process is going to be and what the impact is going to be, then going into production and making those changes there. Once you do go ahead and make a change, you want to make sure that once the change has been rolled out, is that you go back in and confirm that the change rolled out as expected. So not only are you going to check data that was previously entered, but you're going to check how the new data is going to look. You're going to look at your procedures. You're going to look at your extract views. You're going to look at discrepancies. So there's a lot of different areas that you want to test. And just confirm that it hasn't had an additional impact that maybe you weren't expecting. And then again, just like when we started the process, we were documenting. You want to make sure once you've rolled it out and you've checked all these things that you're going to document it fully and make sure that you close any loops. Everybody's satisfied with the change. Nobody's noticed anything weird that has happened, and that it went as expected, and then making sure that that's fully documented in your study documentation. So here it's just kind of a flow chart that one of my colleagues had put together years ago about the process of making a post-production change. So the first box up here is that you're going to identify a need. So you've identified that something needs to be modified. Then you really need to evaluate it, and we'll talk a little bit in a few minutes about some of the things that you need to consider when you're evaluating it. Then you need to submit that change request to other powers that be within your organization to make sure that everybody is on the same page and agrees that that change needs to be made. And you definitely need to assess the impact. Once you assess the impact, then you need to evaluate again. Do you want to proceed with the change? If no, then you need to finalize your documentation. Maybe the impact is, has greater impact than what you wanted it to have, and it's going to impact other business areas, and everyone's not in agreement that you need to move forward. You still need to finalize the decision of what it was of why you're not going to make the change. If you're going to proceed with the change, then you need to be able to make the change and test the change, making sure that it goes through a full user acceptance testing with all parties that are involved. And then you'll be moving that change to production, or making the decision to move the change to production. If upon your testing and UAT you decide, oh no, I wasn't thinking about this part, and no, we're not going to move forward, again you would finalize your documentation. If you're going to move forward, then you're going to go ahead and move it to production. There really should be another box there, because once you've moved it to production again, you need to assess and evaluate and make sure that everything rolled out as expected. And then again, document, document, document. So some things to consider when you're looking at your impact analysis. So you want to make sure you're assessing the impact that the change is going to have, not just on new data in that particular form. So why is the change being made? Look at your overall study objectives. Is it really necessary to make this change in order to meet your study objectives? Look at your study timelines. Is this going to impact your timelines where you need to make this change and you need testing of this change, and then it's going to impact where when you make a change in RDC to a form, now maybe all the monitors need to go back and remonitor that page all over again, and that's going to add additional times, and now we're not going to meet our database lock date. So really look at your timelines and what it's going to impact on your workflows. What do you want to do with the patient data that's already entered? If it's something that you're adding a new question, are you going to prompt the sites that they have to go back now for subjects that maybe have already terminated from the study, and that they have to go back and answer this question now? How is it going to be handled if you don't have those patients with that question? How does it impact your analysis? So really think about, with your patient data that's already entered, what impact is it going to have on that, and what do you want to do with that information? Also, how many discrepancies might fire due to this change, and how will those discrepancies be handled? So for example, if you have a DVG and you're changing the choices for your DVG, where now you have a bunch of subjects that have responded one way to a question, but that choice now is no longer valid, are you going to make the sites go back? Is that going to fire a couple thousand discrepancies where now everybody has to go back and resolve those queries, and the site needs to go in and update the data? Really think about what the impact is going to have down the line. Think about your current study setup. So are there procedures that are now not going to be valid anymore because of the change that you made? So maybe you've decided to update the DVG choices for race, and you have a validation that has code that's looking at, well, if it's not one of these choices, then your other specifies should be blank. Well, now you have another choice in there, so that procedure itself needs to be updated. are your extract views going to be impacted? So do you need to update your extract views? Are you adding an additional question? Are you increasing the length of a question? That kind of things. You need to update your extract views if that's the case. And then what are you going to do with your verification and approval statuses? So in RDC, when you migrate a new form version, you have the choice to be able to either reverse or retain the verification and approval statuses. Once that change is rolled out, do you want the sites and the monitor, or, the investigators and the monitors to have to go back in the form and reapprove it or re-verify it? That's something that you have to consider before you are at the point that you're getting ready to migrate your forms. And then what documentation needs to be updated? Are you adding a new question? Is it a new DBG subset? What do you have to update? Do you have to update your annotations? What's your company's change policy? So what kind of change documentation do you need in place? So these are all things that you need to really think about. For something that may seem relatively simple, it could have impacts along multiple areas in that study. And you want to make sure that you've thoroughly thought about what that impact is going to be. And then you need to assess your options for changing the database. So maybe it's something that instead of doing a database change, it would just be easier to handle it with a convention or a note to file, or some other way rather than going through a database change. If you're going to apply it to the database, does it need to be applied to only the new data or to both, the new and the old data? That's a decision that you're going to have to make. And then you need to figure out, is this database change even possible? I mean, if you're totally changing the layout of your study, is it even possible to do that without having really negative consequences to that change? Once you know what the risks are, you really need to evaluate the risk of those changes to figure out how much system downtime may it require? How is that change going to be communicated to all your affected parties? Is there a risk of losing or corrupting data? Now most of the time there's not a risk of losing data in OC because it does a pretty good job of managing that, but you really want to make sure that there is no risk there that you could incur. And then what is the cost of the change? So how much resource time is going to be spent on making the change, documenting the change, testing the change, and then is the benefit really worth that impact and the risks and the cost associated with it? So changes that may appear and are relatively simple to make in OC may have far-reaching impacts, and you really need to think about and make sure you're asking the right questions to ascertain all the potential impacts before you make any changes. Because for a lot of things in OC, once you make that change, it's impossible to go back. You can refresh your database back to a point that prior to the change, but now you've lost everything that's been done in your database for that time period before you made an error. So just be really careful about what the changes are that you're making and who has the ability to make those changes, and make sure that they understand the process and that they aren't just going in there and all of a sudden just making all these changes in the database without going through the exercise of really assessing the impact and getting everybody's buy-in, et cetera. Because I've seen this several times, and we've had it, especially recently, we've had it where someone has made a change to the database and the impacts are so far-reaching and impossible to untangle from, and it's really made a mess of things. So you really need to make sure that the people that are making those changes understand what your change process is. Okay, so let's talk about some changes that may actually be made and what is just kind of the raw process in OC that you can do to make these changes. So you may need to do some DCM level changes. So that can be something like updating a DVG. adding a new question, removing a question, or there could be minor updates just to labels or your question order or what your DCI header looks like in OC. So these are all DCM level changes. So maybe you need to update a DVG. So if you're going to update a DVG, and this would be if you're going to add a DVG choice, what are some of the questions that you need to be asking yourself? So one is, is there data already entered for that question? And if so, what do you want to happen with that data? So do you want the sites to have to go in and reevaluate their selection for the question? Or do you want them to stay on the old version using the old DVG choice? So if you want them to reevaluate it, you may need to add a new edit check to prompt them to go back in and to look at that question one more time and evaluate whether they have the right answer in there or not. How many discrepancies are going to fire due to the change, and how and who will these be handled by? So maybe that the discrepancy is going to fire for 10 subjects, and you want to manage that beforehand where you're going to notify the sites ahead of time that this query is going to be coming their way and this is how they need to handle it. Simple things like if you're adding a DVG choice, how many characters long is the new choice? Did you remember to update the question length? If so, don't forget that you have to update your extract views as well. Otherwise, when your extract views come through, that field's going to look blank for anybody that chose that new DVG question. How is the data displayed on the form? Is it a list of values? Is it check boxes? So if it's just displayed as a list of values, so when you're in RDC and you're on the field, there's just that little elliptical that's through those 3 dots, and you would pull up a list of possible choices. If it's just a list of values, that's not going to require a form layout change. So that is a relatively simple thing to change. If it's a checkboxes, don't forget that you have to redo your layout because now you have an additional choice with a checkbox or a bubble that you're going to have to accommodate in your CRF layout. And then does this impact the default values or the default responses? So maybe you're adding a new body system for physical exam. If so, and your body systems are pre-filled, this is going to impact the number of repeats and your default responses. Okay, so just some additional things to keep in mind. If you're removing a DVG choice, so maybe you've decided for your physical exam that you're no longer going to evaluate a specific body system. So what are you going to do with the data that's already in there? What do you want to happen with that? If they've already evaluated that body system, are you just going to leave it in there? Did you want to have everybody not include that, so you want the sites to go in and remove that line? So keep in mind that removing a selection that was chosen previously may result in discrepancies firing as well. So make sure that's part of your impact analysis. So, and again, how is the data displayed on the form? Is it a list of values? Is it a checkbox? Does this impact your default repeat values or your default responses? And of course, does it impact any of your procedures as well? Okay, so when you're going to go in and do, for example, an update to a DVG, and you're assuming in this example that I'm giving you that all patients are going to be using the new DVG, what are the steps to go about doing that? Well, you need to go in and you need to create the new version of the DVG. You're going to update the DVG version in the DCM. And then you want to make sure that you update your DVG definition by going into the DCM and doing special graphic layout update DVG from the DVG definition so that you have all those choices available on your screen. You're going to recheck that it's available, and then you're going to go and you're going to generate a new layout. Now keep in mind that if it's a list of values DVG, nothing further is needed once you're done making the modification on the DCM level. But if it is a checkbox, then you're going to have to go in and create a new provisional layout and generate a new DCI form. You'll also need to activate that form, and then you'll have to migrate all of your old data into the new form version. Now it is possible that if you decide that the old patients need to still stay on the old version, this would require potentially a DCM subset, and it gets a little bit more complicated if that's what your decision is. So here's just an example. So I have a demography, and I've decided that I need an additional race code of American Indian added to my race DBG. So what I did is I went in and I created a new version of the DBG. So I first added that new choice to the base DBG, and then I created a new subset, and I renumbered them so that they made sense. This of course is assuming that I can actually renumber a DBG depending on how it's set up. And then I went in and I updated the DCM with a new DBG. I then went into the graphic layout. I unchecked that it was available, and then I went into to update the DBG definition, and then I edited the layout as I needed. Then I would go in and I would recheck that the graphic layout is available so that I could then go in and generate a provisional layout. I generated the provisional DCI form, and then I activate that new form version, which then subsequently retires the old form version. So now for all new data, the new form version will appear where American Indian is one of the choices under race. Now the previously entered data, if I don't do anything further, anything that I entered previously, if I opened up those in RDC, they look exactly the same as they used to look. In order to get them to take advantage of the new form version, I would need to migrate the old data into the new form version. So another change you may make is needing to add an additional question to a DCM. So again, we're going to go through the same kind of exercise of the questions that we need to ask. So is there data already entered for that DCM? And what do you want to happen with those ECRFs? Do you want the new question to appear on the ECRF? Do you want the sites to go back and enter that question? Keep in mind that if you decide to create a new DCM subset, the old data will not migrate to that new DCM. It will have to stay in the old form. So if you decide that your old patients have to have the DCM still set up without that additional question, and you create a new DCM subset, there's no old data won't magically move over to the new DCM subset. It's entered under a different DCM subset. So you have two different DCMs essentially, and that new DCM then you could put in a different DCI book and have new patients just enter from that new form if that's what you wanted to do. You need to update all your documentation because your annotations, keep in mind, will change because you have additional question. If you have database specifications, that document may change. So there'll definitely be some documentation changes that will be needed for adding a question to a DCM. You also need to make sure you check for new validations or derivations that may be needed because you have a new question. Chances are you're going to need to figure out how that's going to be handled. So if you're adding a DCM question, assuming you are not creating a new DCM or a new DCM subset, you can simply add the new question to the DCM. The graphic layout will automatically change to not available. You'll need to go in and actually edit the layout, and then you're going to mark the graphic layout as available. You'll generate your new form or your new layout. You'll generate your new DCI form, activate it, and then you're going to migrate your form version by book to move some of the old data to the new form. All right. If you're going to remove a question, so sometimes it happens that there's a question that you've decided is no longer part of your study objectives, and maybe it's confusing your sites or whatnot, and you want to remove it from the form. keep in mind that by removing it, it doesn't remove the data that's already been entered from OC. So any data that was entered in OC, even after you remove the question, the data is still there. They may not be able to see it from the RDC version, but when you pull the extracts, assuming that you leave that question as part of your extract views, anything that was entered previously is still going to be there. OC doesn't, because you're marking a question as not collected, it's not going to delete anything that was entered previously. This is good news for in case you accidentally mark a question as not collected that you really need to leave in the study. So do you want that previously entered data present in the extract views? So you can remove it from your extract views. Maybe you don't care about it at all and you don't want to, you don't want the statisticians to get confused by it. You can have it not included in the views. Now it's still in the Oracle table, so the data is not going anywhere, but you can have it not extracted if you choose not to. However, make sure that that question is not a trigger question. So if it's a complicated study that's a flex study design, you can't remove a question that was a trigger question to trigger some sort of visit event or trigger another case report form. So be careful when you're removing a question because that could have some big impacts on your complete study design and your DCI book. Was the question used in any derivations or validations that now need to be reprogrammed? And sometimes it's not readily apparent unless you know your programming really well and your procedures really well. It might not be readily apparent that question that you've just removed now messes up something with your validations that all of a sudden now something's not going to fire. Now note, when you do this change on the DCM side and you mark a question as not collected in study, the question is still going to appear in RDC until you migrate the form, but the question won't be enterable. So you want to make sure you have your plan in place for when you make the change that you get the migration of the form version done pretty immediately, because otherwise you're going to most likely confuse your sites because the question's still going to appear, but nobody's going to be able to click on it or enter into that field. Another note when you're making changes and you're using RDC is that some changes, when you make them, you'll make them immediately. You maybe migrate your forms immediately as well. But if people are logged into RDC, nothing's going to look different for them until they log out and log back in. So you want to make sure that when you're making changes that you communicate or kick everybody out for a short period of time while you're making the change and then have everybody go back in so that they can see what has been changed. So steps for removing a question, again assuming you're not creating a new DCM or a new DCM subset, you're going to mark the question in the DCM as not collected in subset. The graphic layout automatically changes to not available. You're going to select special graphic layout and edit as needed because now you may have a big blank spot on your form and maybe you want to move everything up and around. You'll mark the graphic layout as available. You'll generate your new provisional layout. You'll generate your new form. You'll activate the layout and then you'll migrate your form version by book. Okay, so a few notes on migrating version forms. So keep in mind that you can only have one active DCI form version at a time. So OC won't let you have multiple versions of a DCI form active at once. So either one active and one's retired, or there's an active and a provisional one. When a new form version is activated, all new ECRFs that are opened for that DCI will now use that new form version. If no data has been entered for an active form, it won't let you create a new version and then activate that version. So if no data was entered for an active form, so maybe you have a follow-up visit and you've decided to change that form, but nobody's gotten to follow-up yet, so you have no data entered for that form currently, what you want to do is you want to just provisionalize your current form version, edit it, and then reactivate it. It will not let you create a new form version and then activate a new form version if that original form version has no data. Keep in mind that your previously entered case report forms are still going to use the old form until the data is migrated from the old form to the new form, unless you have assigned a preferred version of that DCI as a constraint, and I will show you how to do that here in just a second. Also keep in mind that depending on your form layout template, the eCRF form version being used may not be readily transparent. So if you're having everybody using, if you're having different DCI books using different versions of a form, you may want to create a form layer template that includes the version number, because otherwise it's really difficult to tell when you just open up the case report form which form version this particular patient is using. Okay, so it is possible to add that version number to your form layer template. If you don't want to migrate your old data to the new form, you're going to need to create a DCM subset and a new DCI. You can add a constraint to the assigned DCI book to point to a specific form version, but something has to be different. Either you need a DCM subset or your old patients need to be on a different DCI book so that you can have it point to a different version of the form. To do migration, you do this under the menu path of Definition, DCIs, Migrate Form Version by Book. All right, so this is just taking a look as to what that looks like. So it pulls up this window, which allows you to choose the book name of what the form versions that you need to migrate. You can put in an audit comment of what it is you're doing. It also allows you to do a test run. So you can do a test run of migrating your forms to a new version. It won't actually change anything in production, but you can look at the log then and just confirm that it's actually working and changing the patients that you thought it was going to be changing. So down here you'll see that there's sections here for approvals and verification. This is how you're going to tell the system whether the change then requires the investigators to reapprove the page and your monitors to re-verify the page. That would be the reversing the verification status, or if you want it to retain it, meaning that I want to migrate all my forms to the new version, but anything that's been approved and verified before does not need to be reapproved or re-verified. Now you'll notice under approvals that it's obvious from the Oracle menu that I can change any of this, and you'll see under verification that it's shaded. So where the triggers or where the codeless and settings are for these boxes, this is found, and I'm going to skip a slide ahead, is found under the DCI form local study settings. If you look under version migration, if you go 4 down, you'll see, if you go 6 down, you'll see default setting for reverse approval status and default settings for reverse verification status. And then there's also the user override to reverse approvals and user override to reverse verification. So if I have the override set to yes, that means then that who's ever doing the form migration can change it and say whether the approvals are going to be reversed or not. Same with verification. If I have it set to no, then that area is going to be shaded, and whatever I have set as my default, who's ever doing the form migration is not going to be able to change that. So notice here I have it yes for reverse approvals and no for reverse verification. So if you go to the slide that I was just showing previously, that's why verification is shaded, is currently shaded, and there's default responses in there already, but approval is not. That's because I've given my my database person that's doing the form migration the right to be able to change this and make the decision whether things should be retained or reversed. Now there's a global setting for this as well. But if you go into the DCI form local study settings, you can do this on a per study basis and set these values for what your business process is for doing the migration. Okay, remember when I said that it is possible to use a retired form version in your DCI book for some of your patients, and then use the current version for your new patients only. This is how you do that. If you go under DCI's Enhanced DCI books and you go under Constraints, there's this column here where it says Preferred Version. If I click on that, it gives me all the version numbers that are currently available, as well as the word current. Now the default is that everything will be looking at the current version of your form, but you can set this to have it look at a previous version. So that's how you would keep some of your old patients looking at the version that was active when they were enrolled in the study versus the current version, which would be version 2 in this case. It is possible as well, if you're making post-production changes, that you can update your clinical planned event names. You can also add additional clinical planned events. You are not able to remove a clinical planned event, but keep in mind that if you don't have pages assigned to that event, then for subjects that don't have data entered for that event, it's not going to appear in their RDC screen. That event won't. So here I have an example of changing a CPA name. So in this example, I'm changing, I'm looking at the visit of follow-up, and I want to change it to be follow-up with a 1 at the end. I'm assuming that maybe for this study that we've decided to have multiple follow-up visits, and so I need to change the 1 follow-up to a follow-up 1. And I need to update the visit number as well, because I have some additional visits I need to insert. So I don't want it to be 0, 1, 2. I want it to be 0, 1, and 100. So this is what it looks like under your Clinical Planned Events tab. And then I showed you what it looks like under the DCI Book Navigator in your DCI book as well. So notice that everything matches between the two screens. So when I update a CPE under my event scheduler, so I'm updating this to follow-up 1, and then I'm updating it to visit number 100. This change is immediate and cascades to any records that have been entered previously, and also to your navigator as well. So as soon as I save this and then I go into my DCI book and I look at the navigator, notice that the visit's already been updated with the correct visit number. It is possible as well that you can update your DCI book and make changes to your DCI book. Now again, you can't delete visits from your Enhanced DCI book, but any visits without a DCI will not appear unless data was previously entered for that visit. You can add a new form, or you can remove a form from a particular visit in your navigator. You can also create new DCI books, make updates, renumber book pages, etc. When you're looking at your current DCI book that's available. Remember though that if you're creating a new DCI book, you need to be careful, because the process to assign a new DCI book to individual patients is very time consuming. So if you have, for example, maybe you have one DCI book called current, or all patients, and you've decided that now you're going to have 2 additional DCI books depending on what protocol amendment those subjects were enrolled under. You're going to have to go in and one by one for your patient numbers assign them the new DCI book. And if you have thousands of patients and you have to do it one number at a time because maybe the numbers aren't sequential, that can be really, really time consuming, and you need to make sure you allow for enough time for that to be done, as well as somebody to second verify that it's been done correctly before you run the batch session. So if you have a lot of subjects and it's a really large study, I would consider taking your system offline when you're doing DCI book changes, just to make sure that you can make all the changes and confirm the changes are correct before you continue. So this is just an example of making a DCI book change. So in this example, we added a new form to a new visit in the existing DCI book, and we need to change the DCI book to have a visit to and collect a lab results at that visit. So the first thing I did was I added the new visit to the event schedule, and then I went into my enhanced DCI book and I made the DCI book provisional. For visit 2, I then went in and I added the new DCI book page of laboratory. Now you'll notice here on the screen in my example, notice how it has a display number, and the display number is not sequential with the start page number. So this is going to cause a conflict in your DCI book. So what you're going to need to do then is you're going to need to renumber your book pages so that the numbers are sequential between screening and follow-up 1. When you go to renumber the books, you're going to get a message that's just going to give you a warning letting you know that renumbering the pages may screw up the discrepancy page that's referenced in the actual, or the page number that's referenced in discrepancies. So if you're using RDC, it's not going to have any impact there because they can't really even see the page number. But if you're using Oracle Clinical to manage your discrepancies, this could cause an issue for you. So just keep in mind that when you renumber the pages, you will get this message. In RDC it really doesn't matter, and you can hit yes and just ignore the warning. But in OC this could impact your discrepancy database. Once I've done that, then I go back out to my DCI book. I validate my DCI book to make sure that my DCI book is still valid. And I look at the validation results to make sure that there are no errors or warnings. Assuming that it says success, you can reactivate your DCI book, and now all of your subjects will be under the modified DCI book. In this example with changing the DCI book, migration is not needed because migration is a form level migration, not for a DCI book. So the second I make the change, as soon as I go back into the system, the new form and the new visits are going to be available immediately. Keeping in mind that if users are logged into the system while the change is being made, they may need to log out and log back in order to see that change. Okay, so that's it for my slide presentation. Hopefully you were able to see that even though changes appear and are relatively simple to make in OC, just make sure that you've really assessed what the potential impacts are, because they can be far-reaching and really difficult to undo after you've done them. So all your impacts and testing analysis should really be done before you make any of those changes. All right, I see that we do have a few questions. Eugene, you want to go through those and I can try to answer them? We have 10 minutes left.
Yeah, perfect timing. So for those of you that still have questions, feel free to enter them in the chat feature. We'll get to as many as we can. I see that we have 3 thus far, so we'll go ahead and start. First question is, do you have any suggestions for ongoing paper study to RDC conversion in terms of the setup, configuration, data management?
Certainly, although I'm not sure that that's pertinent to the current conversation, and really depends on what your current configuration is. There's a lot of legwork that needs to be done before you move to RDC, because you're going to be, there's code lists that you need to make some decisions on, etc. But that's certainly something offline that, if that was something that you needed help with, we'd be more than happy to help you with that process.
Perfect. The next question is, when using an earlier version of the DCI forms, what impact will there be when data is changed to the existing form, if any?
Well, again, it really matters what the change is, what change you're making. If it is, something like a new question that's being added or whatnot, there's changes at. It's hard to say what the impact is without knowing what the exact change is. But there certainly can be changes to the existing form. The form's going to look different, and if you've added a new question, that question is going to be blank if you migrated everybody to the new form version. If you've added a new DBG choice, the layout will have to change a little bit in terms of how you have it spaced, etc. But that's something that you really need to test ahead of time, and really is dependent on what the exact change is.
Great, thank you. So the next question, follow me if you can. So can sites update the enter data for a retired DCI form version? Wondering for the scenario described when it's not desirable to migrate a new DCI form version, so the original DCI book has the retired DCI form version and the new DCI book has the new active DCI form version.
Yes, sites can still update and enter data based on that, that one screen that I shared. Let me just get back to that. I gotta find that screen. So this screen here, if you point that preferred version to a retired version, that retired version is what's going to be used. So all of your old data will stay to that retired version, and any patients that are assigned to that DCI book, that's the version that they'll have access to, is that version 1, which was retired. Hopefully that answers your question.
Great. Next question. Tammy mentioned the possibility of kicking users off of RDC. Could you elaborate on how this is done?
Yeah. So one is, it's not easy just to remove access from everybody, especially if you have a large database. You should, as a best practice, you should have a maintenance window where you've notified your sites that the database will not be available Monday nights from 8 p.m. to midnight or something like that, to give yourself a maintenance window. There are ways that you can take the system offline, so you can make the URL not available to incoming traffic. You could on the security side, you could temporarily remove everybody's access from that particular study and then add it back. But if you have a lot of users, that's probably not going to be an easy process to do if you do it manually. You could write a script that everybody that has access to this will not have access to this anymore, and then you could have the access added back with the SQL script as well. So there's a lot of ways that you can do it. The easiest way is just to give everybody a maintenance window and say you need to be out of the system between this time and this time, and then having your DBAs double check the traffic and making sure that nobody's logged in that event. They can kill a session as well, where if somebody's in an event, they can kill everybody's session so that nobody's logged in currently.
Awesome. Thank you. So that does it for all the questions that we have thus far. We'll give it another minute or so. If you have more questions, please type away, and we'll get back to you. In the meantime, I will show you several ways to contact us. And you can contact Tammy directly via email, or you can email our General Life Sciences Info email address. Or if you prefer phone, you can contact any of those numbers depending where you are in the world. And we have a blog that you are welcome to follow, and other social media that you can check us out. Last question is, could you elaborate more about how to clone data into test database from production?
That would be done by your DBAs. So it would be taking a clone of whatever your current data is in production, and then using that as a refresh to refresh your test environment. I'm not a DBA, so to give you the exact steps, I'm not able to do that. All I know is that when I need it done, I call my DBA and say I need my test environment refreshed with my current production environment. Certainly we could ask a DBA for more details of that if you need it.
Perfect. Any more questions at the last minute? Okay, so I think we're all set with the Q&A session. I do want to thank you very much for joining today's webinar. We have a couple of more that are on the schedule and that are going to be scheduled. Our next one is actually very interesting. It's Google search for life sciences companies. So we are going to be presenting with the head of search for Google for Works program, and he will talk about how Google's enterprise search solution can be used in a life sciences company. We've helped a couple of large companies out there, life sciences as well, with their Google solutions. And that's kind of where we are able to integrate Google search through clinical systems, safety systems, as well as other systems throughout the company. Again, thank you so much for joining. Tammy, thank you for presenting. We look forward to having you join future webinars. Take care. Thank you.